thanks to our show sponsors, The Wheat School, RealAg on the Weekend, and ADAMA Canada. While other sources of innovation run dry and fail to understand your needs, ADAMA is here to deliver, and we're all in on you. Talk to your ADAMA sales rep today. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Agronomists. I am your host, Kara Oosterhuis. You know, I am so used to being the producer on the show or writing up the show and not sitting in the host seat that I was actually sitting and waiting for somebody to say hello. But turns out I am the one who has to say hello. So welcome, everyone. I am very excited for today's show. We are talking fusarium head blight and fusarium timing when it comes to spraying, and as well as all the agronomics behind it. And you know how it goes here on the Agronomists. We talk about one topic, but we can branch off in any direction. So please ask your questions. That's what's so much fun about this. I see our regulars are already in there. Hi, Ray. Hi, Pete. Hi, Alan. Hi, Jason. Looks like Peter's doing the rain dance. So happy to have you guys here along tonight. You know, we were just chatting before we actually started here tonight. You know, I think all agronomy shows should start with a little jazz like we have here. So maybe we'll make that a thing. But anyways, without further ado, I'm going to bring in tonight's guests here. I have Tom Wolf of Sprayers 101 and Agrimetrix, as well as Dr. Dave Hooker of the University of Guelph, Ridgetown. How are you guys doing?
Great. I'm doing great. Awesome.
Okay. Now, Tom, I know you just got back from a bit of a trip. You were on in a different time zone. So you awake over there?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. Thanks.
That's awesome. Okay, and what's weather like Saskatoon? Have you guys got some rain?
We had some rain last week while I was away, and it's warm and humid, and the flea beetles are out, and the weeds are emerging, and things are moving quickly.
Yeah, I think the insects are really starting to, at least in Western Canada. I know we're not talking insects tonight, but we always got to check in on them. We have had grasshoppers here in southern Alberta like nobody's business. Just wipe. I'm hearing of fields of barley getting reseeded, fields of wheat getting reseeded, because it's just, you would think they're flea beetles out there attacking. So it's not so great. And I know you're also in a dry zone. Dr. Dave, tell me a bit about what conditions look like over there.
Yeah, in Ontario, in southwestern Ontario at least anyway, we've had quite a bit of cold weather. I think May was one of the coldest months for as long as I can remember anyway, but is also one of the driest months as well. And so we are experiencing quite an unusual, I think, weather month for May, being both cold and dry. Usually dry conditions are usually accompanied by warm temperatures, but we're in a cold and dry spell right now. The corn and soybeans, they look okay. Most of the crops are emerging fine, a little bit slow, but we're just concerned about the dry weather, relatively dry weather for the wheat crop, because it's in a critical stage right now.
Now, when you're mentioning cold, any frost? I know parts of Ontario has seen some frost. Are you in that area?
Yeah, in about a week ago or so, there's some patches of frost damage in central Ontario, eastern Ontario, maybe spotty frost patches elsewhere in the frost-prone areas. And especially, too, if the crops are under stress, let's say a nutrient deficiency, they can become more frost susceptible. And so we've seen some frost injury in some wheat plants showed some frost injury.
Yeah, that's not good. Hopefully you're through that cool part and there's no more concerns about frost.
Yeah.
But anyways, like I said, tonight we are here to talk about fusarium. Now, Dr. Dave, from your perspective, you said a lot of Ontario is just in the boot stage of wheat. Do you want to tell me a bit about timing and what we need to be concerned about right now?
Yeah, from a fusarium perspective, I think a lot of growers are familiar with that disease and the issues that disease can bring. So not only yield reduction, but of course grain quality concerns. And so in years past, we've had some years where we've had epidemics of fusarium head blade, and it has resulted in tremendous losses to growers. And so a lot of growers, they know that they better manage for fusarium head blight, just the risk that some years bring. As some years are a higher risk than others. I think this year may be one of the lower risk years, just because the cooler, dry conditions especially. But it's the grain quality that we're mainly concerned about, because that's the hardest part to manage.
Now, in Ontario, what kind of I know there's a few different types of fusarium. What kind of impacts you guys the most?
Well, the main pathogen that infects or affects wheat in terms of producing the disease Fusarium head blight is Fusarium graminearum. So that's the main pathogen. There are other minor ones, and so we are looking at some of these other pathogens as well, or uh, genotypes of Fusarium pathogens. But the main toxin that they produce once this pathogen infects, let's say, the wheat head, is and barley and oat as well, is deoxynivalenol, or DON for short. So that mycotoxin is the most, I think, most important part of managing Fusarium head blight. It's not necessarily the yield reduction from the disease, but it's the mycotoxins that contaminate the wheat grain, and they're very difficult to control and reduce in that grain sample, and it could result in a loss of grade, a lower grade, or refusal at the market altogether.
So, and not just refusal for human consumption, but also for livestock consumption as well.
Yeah, livestock, especially monogastric animals, of course. The ruminants are not affected that much. They can tolerate higher levels of DON or the mycotoxin, but it's the monogastrics that are really affected by mycotoxins. But of course, wheat, the main market for wheat is for human consumption. And so mycotoxin contamination of wheat grain, of course, is very important for the industry and for growers.
And Peter Johnson is, of course, commenting. He says, "This Dawn is not my friend." You know, that surprises me, Pete, because I know you love wheat, but I thought everybody was your friend. So
Not DON.
interesting. Not Dawn. Dawn is not Pete's
Yeah,
friend.
this DON. That's right.
Pete does have a question here that he has heard from a grower, and this one actually I'll direct towards Tom here. He said, a grower called me today and asked, what is new in fusarium nozzles? Are the 360 nozzles good, the 3070 nozzles, or are turbo flood jets still the best? I know you're nozzle guy on Twitter. You know the nozzles. Do you want to tell us a bit about what you're seeing there?
Yeah, we strongly believe that an angled approach is still the best way to go, and the steeper the angle, actually, the better. So the more that nozzle points forward and backward, the more effectively it will target the head. And the nozzles that are available, there's a quite large selection, but most of them are air-induced nozzles, so they don't actually work with the new pulse width modulated systems that are pretty well dominant now in terms of new sales. But if you were looking for an air induction tip, there are a number to choose from. Every manufacturer has a good selection. TJet has an asymmetric dual fan called the 3070 that's already been mentioned in the comments here. That's a terrific nozzle. It has the right spray quality, has a nice wide fan angle, and has a fairly aggressive angling as well. But all of the manufacturers have them. Hypro has the Guardian Air Twin. If you look at Greenleaf, they have the TADF, the Turbo Drop Asymmetric Dual Fan, and so on and so forth. So there's a pretty large selection to draw from. The people that are in the middle that are really without a product are the PWM folks. And there's been recently a new one. It's a new nozzle from TJet. It's called the Pulse Jet, and it's made specifically for PWM systems. It's a twin nozzle. kind of a worry about that nozzle is that it was made for the dicamba market, so it's ultra coarse, and maybe it's a little bit too coarse for the fungicide world. We do want the nozzles to produce a fairly coarse spray so that they retain their trajectory, their angled direction that they're intended to fly in needs to be retained for at least 20 or so inches, depending on the boom height. And the coarser the spray, the better able they are to do that. But we'd still have to hit the target and cover it adequately. It has to hit the glooms, and you certainly need a certain amount of droplet density for that. So we don't want to get too coarse. But yeah, I think there's that's really the development. The AccuPulse Jet by T-Jet is the new nozzle.
And now with fusarium, are we looking at like the twin nozzles? Are they the better option? Or are they not? Or when it comes to targeting?
It's important to present the target, the head, with a spray that hits it on the side, and a twin or an angled approach is the best. But even North Dakota State has said a single a nozzle, as long as it's angled, is preferable to anything that's straight vertical. So it doesn't have to be a twin, but a twin has the opportunity of hitting the spray or emitting the spray in the other direction, so that the weed head on the other side also gets, or the other side of the weed head, I should say, also gets targeted. So I think that's fairly important to do. And I know, Dave, in some of your work at Ridgetown, you did point flood jets forward and backwards to get that kind of an approach. Is that right?
Yes, we did. We've been looking at this for quite some time, application technologies. And the research has been done so long ago. A lot of the new agronomists now, they don't remember, like it was kind of before their time. Like I guess it's just I'm getting so old that I've done research before the newer agronomists that are in the countryside now are. It was before their time altogether. So we looked at a number of different nozzles, and it was out of the concern of coverage. Because when we looked at the early fungicides, this was around 2000 or the year 2000 or so, we noticed that the nozzles, as Tom said, if they point straight down, coverage is poor. And there has been some work around, and there's still researchers doing this work, that coverage and efficacy, they're directly proportional to one another. So better coverage, better fungicide efficacy. The fungicides, like they are quite good, they're excellent, but if they're not covered, if the head is not covered very well, that means that a good fungicide may turn out to be only a fair fungicide and be less than satisfactory. So we looked at a number of different nozzle types, and Jay, if you could just put on maybe slide number 9 to start off with. So we did some research with Helmut Spicer, and Peter was involved. Peter Johnson was involved, and Albert Tenuta, and Helmut Spicer. Did I just mention Helmut? I'm not sure if I did or not, but he was one of the leaders. And Art Shasma. We were a team looking at this coverage effect. And so this slide 9 represents a card, one of the water sensitive papers that we used out in the field to represent coverage. And so what we did was put these water sensitive papers on a glass vial out in the field. And then so we tried to mimic a weed head. And then we had up to 45 papers throughout the field. So slide number 10. So 45 papers in each strip in the field. So in this rep 3 strip right here, we had 45 of those papers on a glass vial. And so then we had 4 reps of that. So we had, for instance, 180 papers set out to do one experiment with just one nozzle. And so we did this for every nozzle that we tried. And then we looked at the coverage and the variability of coverage from paper to paper. And what we noticed is not only the coverage was different, very different from nozzle to nozzle, but also within the swath, and from just depends on where those papers are placed, makes a huge effect on how well they're covered. And so this is why we needed so many papers to assess coverage. And I think we'll just skip to maybe slide number 12. Slide number 12 shows some different nozzles that we looked at, and slide number 11, we're not going to show slide number 11 just because of time, but we looked at all kinds of different nozzle types. And the one that we really liked is the forward and back T-jet flat fans, forward and backwards, but we also like the alternating turbo flood jets, so in the bottom right-hand corner. And this was the spray pattern that Tom was talking about. You know, that very shallow angle forward and shallow angle back of the next adjacent nozzle. And that seemed to produce excellent coverage. And the coverage, just an example of the coverage, is on slide number 13. And you can see the forward and backward that I mentioned. That's kind of just a typical standard gold standard in terms of a nozzle configuration. So that's the first 6 papers there. But the middle alternated turbo flood jet, the blue represents coverage on the yellow water sensitive papers. And you can see those papers are covered very well. And that was just a sampling, 7 papers or 6 papers there out of the 180 that we tried. And compare that with a twin jet. And some say, well, I've got, a twin jet nozzle. I've got 2 spray angles coming from one nozzle, and it should produce good coverage. I've got lots of, fogging that's going on. And you can see that it just does not have the same coverage as our forward and back or the alternating turbo flood. Now, Tom, do you have any criticism, or what do you think about this study that we did, 20 years ago now?
That's how time flies. I really like the study because it actually dovetails nicely with what we also found. We did try finer sprays and coarser sprays. So the coarser sprays on the left side here, the Turbo T and the Turbo Flood on the left of this slide, and the finer sprays, the Twin Jet. And we also agree that the finer sprays were not as effective at targeting the heads as the coarser sprays were. And we attribute that to what I said earlier, the ability of them to actually make the droplets fly in the direction that they're intended to fly in for some distance. And the other thing that we found, though, was that a low boom did ameliorate that to some degree. So the lower you can have your boom and still have a good pattern, still have good overlap, the more likely the droplets are to hit the head on the side of the head where they're supposed to be. So we kind of have felt that it's really a package of maybe 3 or 4 different application parameters: angled sprays, coarse nozzles, low booms. And we also did some travel speed work, Dave. We traveled slow and quickly, and we had a surprising outcome. And that was in perhaps the only time ever we found that a faster travel speed was actually preferable. And the reason was that the faster travel speed was, gave the forward facing spray an even more forward momentum. So the forward facing nozzle does the heavy lifting in terms of deposit, and you just helped it by going a little faster. It made its job easier. The backward facing nozzle had the hardest job. And we often felt that if the boom was a little high and there was a bit of a breeze, that the backward facing nozzle's efforts were really in vain, that the wind usually determined where this spray was going to deposit. Let's face it, it's hard to have a boom at 14 or 18 or even 20 inches above the canopy these days. The boom sway kills you. And so most people have them 25 or even up to 30 inches above the canopy. If they're that high, then the wind always wins. And we found when we did that in our field trials, the windward side of our water sensitive paper was usually the one that got the majority of the spray. So low booms were absolutely essential. And so that's another one of the reasons why we've advocated for, efficiency and being able to drive a little slower. That allows you to have the boom lower and still be productive.
Great. So we did some work on the travel speed, Tom, and we also found that 12 miles an hour was better than 6 miles an hour. Before we did the research, we were suggesting, slow is better. But after we did the research, we were just amazed, how well coverage was at 12 miles an hour. And of course, after we had to change nozzles and whatnot. to deliver 20 gallons per acre and the same pressure because we're just adjusting one variable at a time. But speed seems to be good. 12 miles an hour. I'm not sure if 18. We did it. I remember a trial with 18, and I think we were losing some of the coverage at 18.
Yeah,
But
18
maybe we're
would
yeah,
be a little much. I kind of agree, but isn't it ironic that when it's easy to go fast, we say don't do it, and when you really don't want to go fast, we say go ahead.
yeah.
So
That's right.
it's like, yeah,
That's right.
we're basically antagonistic to the applicator.
Yeah. So
Now what
slide.
happens in
So
those
go ahead,
slower
Karen.
speeds, Dr. Dave? Like what was actually happening when you were going 6 mile an hour?
Well, I think the coverage, it wasn't quite as good as it was at 12 miles an hour. But the thing is, the other thing with fusarium head blight management and reducing dawn is timing of application. And if we're going 12 miles an hour, we could just simply cover more acres in a day. We can hit that timing, ideal timing for the application better out at 12 miles an hour compared to 6. And so the coverage was a little bit better at 12, but I think we got our timing better at 12 miles an hour. Yeah, slide 15, it shows that height difference in the coverage very well. So we did some work on height as well. So twin jet, the best we could do was just less than 10% coverage of those water sensitive papers. That's a green bar there. And if we went high on the twin jet, so at 30 inches above the canopy, our coverage was reduced. The same occurred for turbo flood jet, but if we start at high, if we reduce or if we go at a higher boom height, then our coverage is lower, but it's still better than the twin jet coverage. And as Tom mentioned, like the wide sprayers these days, it really have to, or it's more, there's a more tendency to have a need for a higher boom above the canopy. And so we just have to make sure that it's as low as possible. And when I'm spraying my wheat at home and on my farm, I've got some rolling ground. I just only have a 60-foot sprayer, but if quite often, if one part of my boom is dipping into the wheat canopy, just once in a while, I know that my boom height is about optimally adjusted, which is a different mindset than spraying a herbicide, where we want a distance above the soil profile or above the canopy if we're spraying a fungicide for foliar. But if it dips into the canopy once in a while, I say that's good because our boom height is as low as it can be.
Do you agree with that, Tom?
I guess I do. I mean, it's you kind of ideally want the boom height to be just so, and I think that is really the one thing that I still rail about
Yeah.
the sprayers. And Peter asked a question, and I'm not sure if you're going to get to it, Kara, but I saw it just now, and he's saying, what about that? What about sprayers that can deliver low and steady booms? And I think it's coming. They're coming to the market. I think the sprayer manufacturers are realizing that this is important. I mean, look at boom height, as fundamental and as basic as it seems, is so important for spraying. Lower booms reduce drift. Lower booms, uh, you know, improve targeting of fusarium fungicides. Isn't that enough reason? That there's a lot of good reasons to have the boom low, and
Mhm.
we're starting to see some manufacturers that pay specific attention to it. Well, the most notable one really is Horsch Lieb. They've come on the market with a specific claim that they can hold their boom steady at 15 inches or so, plus or minus a few above the canopy, above ground, and hold it there without hitting the ground. And I think that's an important feature to consider these days.
Mhm. Can we go to slide 16? Because it really shows that drift potential there. So Tom, I stole this slide from another Tom, but it really shows the drift potential. The same sprayer delivering the same water volume, same droplet size distribution, and the boom height just changed from 30 inches to 20 inches. And look at the drift difference there.
Yeah,
Just
and Tom
incredible.
Robinson, formerly with Syngenta, now a private consultant, one of the most respected individuals in the business in the UK and worldwide, really. has done so much work on fusarium as well. And in fact, his work resulted in some of the first angled sprays ever produced. He did that work when he was with Syngenta, and he worked with Hypro and at that time Lermark to develop the first angled nozzles that said, we think we can do a better job for fusarium with these nozzles. And that's thanks to him. So hats off to the effort. And that's a classic slide. And notice too, by the way, that, our buddy Jason DeVoe in Spurs 101, he started an Instagram account, everyone. So, and one of the first things he posted, yes, shy Jason finally has emerged from behind the
Shy
curtain.
Jason.
Shy Jason has got an Instagram account. And the first little story he put on was about the effective boom height. And it's very much like your slides, Dave, where he had a Hagee on the field and he raised and lowered the boom. And what a big difference it made. I don't understand, how we can spend so much money on these sprayers and still not have adequate boom height control and reliable low booms. It really should be a priority.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think sometimes producers miss they're so focused on timing and the window of, especially when it comes to fusarium, that they're not necessarily paying as much attention as they should be to those things?
Kara, I think that's such an important observation because I actually think that the timing actually possibly is maybe the most important thing. There is a narrow window of opportunity for fusarium. And if you miss that window, then the excellent application job with the excellent fungicide isn't really worth as much, or maybe anything for that matter. So timing is everything, I think. And I get a little bit less hung up on how to spray, and I worry a little bit more about when to spray. Are you ready to spray? What are your logistics like? Can you do the water volume you need? Those are just as important as the nozzle setup. If the window is there, if it's a time to spray, stop fiddling with your sprayer and go and spray. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, before we continue here on that note, Jay, we're going to go over to our first clip as we are now on to talking about timing. So I think that is a very important one that we need to continue to discuss after this clip.
Timing is best between day 2 and day 5 or day 6, somewhere in that window. That's the opportune time. Watch your wind, because we have to paint the head. Only way you paint the head is if the wind is calm. If I have much wind, even though I fire that spray ahead, the wind turns it around, and so above about 15 kilometers an hour, we only paint one side of the head, 50% efficacy.
Our sponsors tonight are ADAMA Canada, RealAg on the Weekend, and the Wheat School. From varietal advancements, protein and yield management, precision farming, and on to marketing, Real Agriculture's Wheat School is a video series that tackles every facet of the wheat growing season in an engaging and informative format. The Wheat School is made possible through Syngenta Canada, C&M Seeds, and the Alberta Wheat Commission. Learn more at www.wheatschool.com. So yeah, timing, we know painting that head is crucial, as we just said, but as we kind of go further into timing, do you guys want to talk about, if it's hot, if it's dry, what are some of our considerations there?
Well, if it's hot and dry, like fusarium responds to weather. It's the biggest variable is weather, and it doesn't matter the variety. All varieties are there's no totally resistant variety, but the right weather, favorable weather conditions can make wheat susceptible to fusarium. And so the weather conditions, it depends on when that weather occurs. And so I have a slide here. So I did quite a bit of work in the late 1990s and early 2000s regarding modeling fusarium and dawn accumulation in wheat. So if you can go to maybe slide 3. So slide 3 shows 3 critical periods in terms of fusarium or increased dawn levels in harvested or mature grain. So these three critical periods are around heading time. So the day of head emergence, we call that day 0. So that's growth stage 59. We first have the first critical period is right before heading, and that's the period we call that the inoculum production phase. And so the spores in the field, they are being produced during this phase, and so the ascospores are being produced. And so cold weather around this time delays the production of these spores, and also rainfall, moisture at the soil surface increases the chance of these spores being produced right before heading time. And then critical period B, that's the infection phase. And this is the phase between day 3 and day 6 after head emergence. So it's between 3 and 6 days after head emergence, or at full flowering phase or so, growth stage 61 to growth stage 65 or so. And we call that the infection phase. And so rainfall in this period, humid conditions in this period, and a humid day we would say is a day with relative humidity 80% or over at around 11 o'clock in the morning. We would say that would be a humid or a wet day, like a rain day. And so that would be the infection phase. And also high temperatures can reduce risk in this infection phase as well. So temperatures above 32 degrees Celsius can reduce infection. And the same thing with the growth phase as well. So infection takes place during critical period B, and then we need warm and wet conditions in critical period B for that fusarium to start growing within the head. So cool temperatures reduces the risk. Temperatures around 25, 28 degrees Celsius, they're ideal for this growth phase. And these critical phases are very important for the final dawn levels in mature grain.
And now, if you're looking at, of course, rain and playing into that timing, what about a manufactured rain? Have you done any research when it comes to irrigation and irrigation timing when it comes to fusarium risk?
Yeah, we have looked at that. We're not in an irrigated area in Ontario, but we do evaluate quite a few fungicides. We have done that work, and we want infection if we're looking at to look at fungicide efficacy. And so what we've done, we have irrigated out in the field with a sprayer, like put a ridiculous amount of water on the crop 3 or 4 times a day, like 200 gallons per acre equivalent of water with a sprayer, and try to create that wet canopy. But it hasn't resulted in the success that we would think it would in terms of calling that a wet day. And so that is kind of the artificial, I guess, the irrigation to try to look at that wet canopy. But we haven't looked at, irrigating the soil and looked at an irrigated condition from that approach. But from our fusarium nurseries, they are inoculated. They are misted with an overhead irrigation system, and that's what we use to look at variety susceptibility. And we have had good results with that approach. But I think the inoculum plus irrigation, I think that's important in that system rather than just looking at irrigation alone.
Tom, do you have any
Yeah.
comments there?
Yeah, and I just wanted to draw attention to the fact that the Western Canadian commodity groups have fusarium head blight risk maps that are available during the growing season. So the Manitoba Crop Alliance, Alberta Wheat and Barley, and Sask Wheat all have these risk maps available, and they do exactly what Dave described here. They basically monitor temperature and rainfall and give you basically a heat map of the risk in your area, and that can inform your decision to spray your wheat. And of course, it is a tight window, as we said. It's as in the clip, as Peter mentioned, it's between day 3 and 5 after anthesis. It's very quick. and on a warm day it can be really just literally 2 days. So, and I think Randy Kuchar here at the University of Saskatchewan is revisiting some of the work on timing and maybe with some new chemistry. And I'm not privy to the exact details, but I understand from listening to him make these presentations is that we might have a little bit more room at the end of flowering than we thought we did. So that's actually positive news. I'm not sure if you've heard the same thing, Dave. You're maybe more in tune with some of
Yes.
that pathology work. But it may be a slightly wider window than we think. But again, towards the end of anthesis, not in advance of anthesis.
Yeah, exact same thing. That's what we're seeing in our trials, and interestingly, from our U.S. colleagues, they have noticed the same as well. So it's a little bit beyond the label. The label says, don't worry about spraying. The efficacy is close to zero after, let's say growth stage 65 or 66. So the later part of flowering, but the work in the U.S. by independent at land grant universities and our work as well does show fair efficacy, towards the later stages of flowering, and which is very interesting.
So, Dave, Pete's going to put you here on the hot seat. Sorry, he says so
Okay.
hot and dry in Ontario Ag right now. He actually used hashtag #OntoAg. So Pete's just wants to let you know that he's up with what's going on. Has been mainly dry, other than Friday, May 19th rain. Weed is heading.
Right.
Spray, not spray. What do you do there?
Well, we think that fusarium, based on the current weather, this does not look to be a fusarium year. So that is good news. And because there are some years, there's actually quite a few years where we're getting some timely rains around heading, around flowering, and we're concerned about fusarium. And I think those are the years we really need to pay a lot more attention to application technology, making sure our applicators are set right, and timing was mentioned earlier, and making sure that the fungicides are applied at the right timing. But in a year like this year, maybe timing is it's not as important, to target that fusarium risk if fusarium risk is going to be low. So in our trials, and if you could just show Jay, just put up slide number 6, please. We've done a lot of trials that show yield increases, even though fusarium had blight, risk is low during dry conditions. And so this is part of a huge trial that we had, this over 300 comparisons in this trial. I can see my image is frozen. Hopefully you can still hear me.
Yeah, you're good.
But this is a trial. This is called a box plot. And okay, this is called a box plot. And what the middle box represents, there's a line through the middle box, and it shows an average yield response of 8.8 bushel per acre. But 50% of the responses are between 5.5 and 11.5 bushel per acre yield response. Now, those yield responses 8.8 and above, sometimes we get 11.5 or above 11 years where we do have rainfall and disease potential around heading time. And I think the lower whisker there in this box plot, it represents more of the drier years. And even in a dry year, we can expect, 25% of the responses in this case. So a quarter of these 300 comparisons had a yield response of 5.5 bushel per acre. Like it's just an incredible yield response, even in dry conditions. And I think that, there is still a possibility for fusarium risk. I think we can tackle that with a very effective T3 application. But I think it would be hard to miss, just based on this data, the effect of a T3 passing on a T3 fungicide application, just because it is hot and dry.
And just to add to that, the T3 timing, of course, is fusarium timing, but it's not necessarily too late to protect the flag leaf, particularly in a dry year.
That's right.
And you do
Yeah.
have in the triazole group of fungicides, you do have this gibberellin-like side effect, which basically prolongs the green leaf area duration. And even in the absence of disease, the application of some of these triazole fungicides has shown in cereal that you do have longer green flag leaves. And that, of course, is one of the reasons that we might be seeing some of these yields in the absence of disease.
Hmm. Hmm. And especially the newer fungicide chemistries as well. They have another chemistry, not a triazole chemistry, but a carboxamide chemistry that does show very strong stay green effects. And that's one of the reasons I think why we're seeing some tremendous yield responses, just because there's increase or better health of that canopy, longer stay green, that grain fill. There's a longer duration of that grain fill period.
Now, Tom, we talk about timing here and how crucial it really can be. Do you want to just get into a bit when it comes to having your sprayer ready and having those fungicides on hand and having everything ready to go and what how that plays into it?
Yeah, and it's kind of it seems so elementary that people may not be focusing enough energy on it. But especially in a year like maybe Ontario's having, where you might say, you might be on the fence about the fungicide because you think, well, it's dry, maybe not necessary. And then all of a sudden things change, and then you said, well, something's triggered my decision. I'm now in fact going to spray, and then you're absolutely caught on the back foot, and that's what you want to avoid. So to me, I always go back to the basic rules of agronomy, and agronomy to me is doing the right thing at the right time. It's a very simple formula, and the right thing may not become apparent until you don't have much time left. So it's always important to be prepared. I think it's possible to return unused product. I hope. I'm not sure about the retail situation these days, but I hope it's possible to return unused product. So it's probably better to have it on hand. On our farm, when I was growing up and we started spraying against fusarium graminearum in the mid 1990s, we built our own double nozzles, and we put the pieces together with swivel things, and we bought special caps that we could rotate the nozzles and with a little 3/8 inch wrench and so on. And I recall basically missing, not being ready with that sprayer, and then missing the opportunity to spray. And we called the aircraft to do the job for us because we ran out of time. There's a classic lesson learned about just doing it at the right time and being ready to do so.
It goes very fast. But speaking of going very fast, we have to throw to our last sponsor here quick, and then we have some more questions to get after. So, Producer Jay, if you can do that, that'd be great. Our sponsors tonight are ADAMA Canada, The Wheat School, and RealAg on the Weekend. In partnership with Ralco Radio in Saskatoon, Real Agriculture is pleased to present RealAg on the Weekend with host Sean Haney. Listen live on Saturdays at 4 p.m. in Saskatchewan on 650 CKOM Saskatoon and 980 CJME Regina for a 1-hour agriculture-focused radio show. Can't listen at 4 p.m.? The show will also be available at Real Agriculture on RealAg's podcast feed and on CJME.com and CKOM.com as a podcast download. So Pete brings up a great point here that I wanted to make sure we hit. And he says, is aerial application acceptable, Tom? When it comes to coverage, what are we looking at there?
Well, it's certainly aerial. Aircraft have done a lot of fusarium spraying, and they've done so successfully. And in the fungicide work where we compare different application methods, and we didn't actually compare aerial to ground in fusarium. We did compare it to other diseases, and we found that they compared relatively favorably for the other diseases. So again, the big decision was whether to spray or not. So good agronomy, good prediction maps, and being basically prepared is still the fundamental there. And then exactly how you spray, I think you want to give the fungicide the biggest leg up that you possibly can. Remember, the disease is highly virulent. The germplasm is still disappointingly susceptible. and particularly some of the varieties grown in the southern prairies, like the Durhams, and also we have fungicides that are really only rated for suppression. So we do have to give them the best possible help that we can with proper application method. But I would say that, you know,
Oh no. Did you lose Tom as well, Dr. Dave?
Yes.
Wow. He was he's just taking a little break.
Oh,
Oh, looks like you're back. We lost you there for a second there, Tom.
yeah, I froze up. So I would say the answer that we arrived at was that, the difference between not doing it and doing it was so big that the method in which you do it is perhaps a little bit less important. So if you have the pressure, you have the susceptibility, you have the conditions, then spray with whatever means that you can. Actually, I think that's going to pay greater dividends than delaying it and waiting for the ideal application opportunity.
Okay. We have another interesting question here from Gord Speckschneider. I hope I'm saying that right. Sorry, Gord, correct me if I am wrong. But any links between plant nutrition and more or less susceptibility to FHB? I.e., is there anything we can do to manage in addition to fungicide? Dr. Dave, maybe you have some thoughts?
Dave, yes.
well, yeah, plant nutrition. There is very limited data on or whether the health of a plant, at the timing of infection, would play a role in, whether that plant is more or less susceptible to fusarium. But we have noticed some effects due to in furrow placed phosphorus at seeding time to make the wheat canopy head at more uniform. And so again, we're back to the timing of application. We want uniformity of application across the field, not only from on one plant, let's say during your scouting in your scouting trail, but uniform heading across the field, and that will help with a better fungicide timing. So that's important as well.
And Tom, what about water volumes? Is when it comes to fusarium fungicide, are we looking at higher water? Is more water always better?
It's usually better. We
We
have
don't
a
say
special case
always.
with fusarium. The target is actually fairly exposed. It's at the top of the canopy. It's visible. The spray can hit it relatively easily if it's angled. And so we don't have a classic situation of having to penetrate multiple layers of foliage and to get deeper into a canopy where water is usually the primary tool. So we do have an opportunity to have, I would say modest amounts of water. So, the labels say 10 gallons, and that's really probably the bare minimum. I would say a little more water is probably advisable. I think it's good practice for anything. It gives you more water, also gives you the opportunity to spray a little bit coarser, and because it basically allows for the creation of more droplets and therefore better coverage. So being able to spray a little coarser gives you two key advantages. The first one we already talked about: the trajectory stays straight and angled longer. But the second one is we're less affected by wind. And so if the window of opportunity happens to be on a slightly windy day, and all this angling of the sprays might be in vain, because as Peter said in this little clip, it'll just spray it, you'll just blow it to one side anyways. The larger drops do prevent that from happening. And that's all made possible with more water volume. Remember, a lot of our, I guess, logistics in the spraying season are built for the high pressure time, which is when all the fields have to be treated with the first post-emergent spray pass. A lot of pressure on the timing. The fungicide timing, we have a little bit more leeway. Not all of our crops require fungicide at the same time. Certainly, the wheat requires the fungicide in a tight window. We already said that, but maybe only a third or a quarter of your area is in fact wheat. So you do have the luxury of maybe applying more water and not, being able to tender that successfully and still get your job done. You don't have to do your entire farm in 2 days. You only have to do maybe a quarter of it in a few days.
And now Warren Schneckenberger is bringing up a really good point here that I think is always a problem when it comes to any sort of spraying is timing, especially when it comes to a lack of uniformity. He says so many fields of streaky wheat this year. Will the lack of uniformity affect the T3 timing?
Yep, the answer to that is quite possibly. It could challenge the T3 timing. And so obviously we want to ideally time our fungicide, but quite frequently it just depends on where we are in the field, what that ideal timing is. It could be late on some areas of the field, earlier on other areas, and maybe there's more of a risk in the late heading, or there would be more of the risk with the early heading. Just depending on where that weather pattern occurs when those heads do emerge. And so if you notice some weather coming in, like favorable weather for fusarium coming in fairly late, maybe you should time, the fungicide application to protect those late emerging heads, to protect those heads that are emerging late, let's say, during a favorable, let's say, weather event that may be happening at that time. So you can kind of tweak that timing, but it definitely becomes more of a challenge when to spray that field if it's not uniform. And so we have spatial variability, incredible variability this year, especially as well. If the wheat crop goes under stress, before heading, it tends to delay development. And so those areas tend maybe to be not quite as far as advanced compared to some of the good areas in the field.
Dave, what have you heard about split applications of fungicide for this to sort of mitigate that?
Yeah, we've done a little bit of work. We haven't done a lot of work with split application of fungicides, and I know that some growers, they, let's say, apply a half rate of fungicide early, and then another half rate of the fungicide a little bit later. But that results in 2 passes with the fungicide, and so that may not work I don't think, for the majority of growers to make 2 passes. But I think it would be better from a fusarium management perspective to cover that window, make that window a little bit wider, or cover that window a little bit wider if the head emergence is variable across the field. But on a practical sense, I really can't see the practicality of that, or the feasibility of that with a lot of growers.
Mm-hmm. The classic approach has always been obviously to pay attention to the main column and ignore the tillers, and there can be quite a number of tillers depending on the season, and to thereby basically increase the proportion of the main columns by increasing your seeding rate a little bit. And that's sort of an approach I've heard. I'm not sure how successful it's been, but it's one way to sort of narrow the variability a little bit.
Yeah, it's one of my pet peeves, actually, is growers spraying a field and they still have 25% of the heads that are still like in the boot that have not even emerged yet. So maybe these tillers that you're talking about. And so the main columns maybe are at the ideal stage, but maybe that application could have been a few days later in order to catch those heads that have not emerged yet. And again, as Peter mentioned in that video, if they're not covered with a fungicide, it's like you don't have any fungicide on them at all. So those late head emergers could be a problem if favorable weather occurs or after they're emerged.
Paint that head. That's what you got to keep to get that fusarium away. But unfortunately, we are out of time. But I am very happy you guys came here. It is always great to talk about our not friend, Don, Pete. And Always great to catch up with you, Tom, and talk about sprayers and agronomy, Dave. So appreciate your time very much. And as you guys know that you're watching, thank you very much for tuning in. You can get your CEU credits by watching this video, so be sure to apply for those just by visiting the site, and we'll get you all hooked up with those credits. So be sure to check this out. And Lindsay Smith will be back in the host seat next week, so never fear, she will be back. We can't quite get rid of her. So tune in, and see you guys all next week.
Okay, see you later.